What if the past is not as distant as we think? Not because it is closer in time, but because it is closer in memory. Sometimes, history feels like a straight road, a clean line from stone tools to skyscrapers, from caves to cities, from silence to civilization. But every so often, the earth interrupts that story. A carved pillar emerges from soil. A staircase appears beneath the sea. A stone block sits in a quarry, too heavy for any known machine, and too precise for any known hand. And suddenly, the road bends. Picture yourself standing on a lonely hill in southeastern Turkey. The wind is dry. The landscape is quiet. Nothing about this place suggests it holds a secret. And yet beneath your feet, buried for thousands of years, lies one of the strangest human achievements ever uncovered. The year, if we could step back into it, would be around 9600 BCE. Human beings, according to the timelines we were taught, are still wandering, still hunting, still living in small groups, moving with the seasons, untouched by architecture or organized ritual. They are not supposed to be builders, and yet they built. Massive limestone pillars, some weighing as much as a modern truck, rise from circular enclosures. They are carved with foxes, vultures, serpents, lions. The animals seem to move in the stone, as if the sculptors understood not only form, but myth. There are no houses here, no hearths, no trash pits, no evidence of daily life, only ceremony. A temple without a town, a monument without a civilization. This place is Göbekli Tepe, and its discovery did not simply add a chapter to human history. It rewrote the beginning. Archaeologists had long assumed that farming came first, that people settled down, grew crops, formed villages, and only then developed religion, art, and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe suggested the opposite. That belief came before bread. That ritual came before agriculture. That the human need to gather around mystery may have shaped civilization itself. And then, as if the story weren't strange enough, the temple was buried. Not by accident, not by erosion, but deliberately. Thousands of tons of earth were poured over the stones, sealing them like a time capsule. Someone, long ago, decided this sacred place needed to disappear. We can only guess why. Was it preservation? Was it fear? Was it a farewell? Or was it something even harder to name? The quiet ending of a world. From here, the questions only deepen. Because Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Across the planet, scattered like half-remembered dreams, are other sites that seem to stand outside the expected timeline. Terraces beneath the waves near Japan. A hill it started with a dive. Not a grand expedition, not a government-funded search, just a man in the water looking for sharks. Off the coast of Yonaguni Island, at the southwestern edge of Japan, the sea is clear and restless. The currents are strong. The underwater world feels ancient, carved by time and pressure. In 1987, a local dive operator descended into those blue depths, expecting the familiar shapes of coral and rock. Instead, he found something that didn't belong. A structure, not a reef, not a scattered outcrop, but terraces, sharp edges, flat platforms, stone steps that seemed to descend with intention, like the remains of a forgotten monument. 100 feet beneath the surface, the ocean floor looked architectural. The discovery spread quickly, igniting one of the most enduring debates in underwater archaeology. Because if those shapes were truly carved by human hands, then they were impossibly old. Sea levels were not always what they are now. At the end of the last ice age, the world's coastlines changed dramatically. Glaciers melted, oceans rose, entire plains vanished beneath water. If Yonaguni had once stood above sea level, any structure built there would date back more than 10,000 years, long before the first known Japanese civilizations, long before written history, long before we expect stone monuments in the Pacific. A marine geologist named Masaki Kimura spent years studying the site. He returned again and again, measuring, photographing, mapping. To him, the evidence suggested human modification. The angles seemed too precise, the symmetry too deliberate. He identified what looked like tool marks, post holes, even road-like connections between terraces. He believed Yonaguni was not just geology, it was a submerged ceremonial complex, perhaps even a pyramid. But other scientists disagreed. They argued that sandstone fractures naturally in straight lines, that tectonic shifts and wave erosion can create step-like formations. Nature, they said, is capable of geometry. The monument, they insisted, was mostly natural, a beautiful accident of rock and sea. And so Yonaguni remains suspended between explanations, a place where certainty dissolves like salt in water. But standing at the surface, looking down into that vast blue silence, it is hard not to feel something deeper stirring. Because even if nature shaped the stone, why does it resemble human design so closely? And if humans did shape it, who were they? What kind of people built monuments on coastlines that would later disappear? We often imagine ancient humans as land-bound, villages by rivers, cities on plains. But the Ice Age world was different. The shorelines were farther out. The coastal shelves were wide, fertile, alive. Millions of people may have lived where fish now swim, and when the waters rose, their homes would have vanished without a trace. No ruins on land, no broken walls in the open air, just silence beneath the waves. Yonaguni forces us to confront that possibility, that the ocean is not only water, it is archive, it is burial ground, it is the great eraser of human memory. Perhaps the strangest part is not the monument itself, but how little of the submerged world we have truly explored. We have mapped Mars more thoroughly than our own seafloor. There may be cities beneath the ocean that we will never name, stories drowned before they were written, and Yonaguni sits there, unmoving, waiting, not demanding belief, only asking a question. What else did the sea take, and what does it mean that the boundary of history may not be on land at all, but under the shifting surface of the deep? From Japan's underwater terraces, our journey continues. Because farther south, in the mountains of Indonesia, another mystery rises, not beneath the sea, but beneath a hill. A place that may not be a hill at all. Imagine a mountain hiding a secret. In West Java, Indonesia, a place called Gunung Padang has long been considered sacred by the local people. To the untrained eye, it looks like nothing more than a grassy hill, its slopes scattered with oddly shaped stones, columnar basalt, arranged in terrace-like levels. But in 2010, geologist Danny Hillman Natarajaja looked deeper. Armed with ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys, his team discovered something astonishing. The hill wasn't a hill. It was a structure. Beneath the visible stones lay layers of chambers, massive walls, and what appeared to be an enormous step pyramid. The further down they scanned, the stranger the dates became. The top layer, understood and accepted, was about 3,500 years old. Megalithic, certainly, but within the bounds of known history. But below that, radiocarbon dating from deeper strata yielded dates between 8,000 and 13,000 BCE. Even lower layers suggested 20,000 years ago or more. If those dates are accurate, Gunung Padang is not just old, it is impossibly old. It would predate every known pyramid, every known monument. It would push organized construction back to a time when humans were supposedly scattered, primitive, without tools or cities. The structure is not small. The pyramid, if confirmed, would rise nearly 300 feet from its base, buried beneath centuries of soil and vegetation. Seismic scans reveal internal chambers, some rectangular, others vaulted, impossible to reach without excavation. And some of the stonework shows signs of advanced technique. The basalt columns appear arranged, not randomly fallen. Some are bound with a cement-like substance containing organic material. What Natawidjaja claims is an ancient form of geopolymer concrete. To critics, this is unacceptable. Mainstream archaeologists argue that the dates are misleading, that the carbon samples reflect natural material, lava flows, ancient soils, not human activity. They insist the hill is volcanic, not architectural, just a mountain. But mountains don't build rectangular rooms. They don't align terraces to cardinal directions. And they don't mix organic material into concrete-like compounds. Even if only part of the site is artificial, even if only one layer is man-made, it changes the timeline, because someone, long ago, built something large and enduring. And then it vanished. Was it swallowed by jungle and time? Was it abandoned, forgotten, buried intentionally like Göbekli Tepe? Or was it destroyed by nature, by climate, by something else? Gunung Padang hints at a civilization that may have risen before recorded history, flourished in the shadows of the Ice Age, and left behind stone as its only witness. It is still under excavation. Political battles have delayed progress. Scientific institutions argue over its validity. The deeper chambers remain sealed. And so, like many ancient enigmas, it waits, buried, silent, presenting us with a riddle. What does it mean when the oldest structures on Earth are the least understood? If our ancestors were capable of pyramid construction 20,000 years ago, what else were they capable of? And how much of their story lies beneath our feet, hidden not in deserts or museums, but in the hills we've walked past for centuries without a second thought? From a hidden pyramid in Indonesia, we now cross the waters again, to the west coast of India, where myth and sonar collided to resurrect a city once thought to exist only in legend. Some cities are built in stone. Others are built in story. For thousands of years, the ancient Indian texts spoke of Dwarka, a magnificent coastal city of temples and gates said to have been founded by Krishna himself, a place of beauty and order, and a place that, according to legend, was swallowed by the sea. To modern ears, it sounded like myth, a poetic way of speaking about impermanence, a metaphor for the end of an age. But then, in the early 2000s, something unexpected happened. Not in a temple, not in a library, but in the quiet hum of sonar equipment. India's National Institute of Ocean Technology was conducting surveys off the coast of Gujarat, scanning the seabed for environmental research. And beneath the waters of the Gulf of Kutch, their instruments began to detect shapes, lines, right angles, geometric patterns too regular to ignore. At depths of more than 100 feet, underwater teams found what appeared to be stone walls, foundations, and building-like structures stretching across a wide area. A grid, almost like a planned city. Artifacts were retrieved. Pottery fragments, beads, worked stone, even fossilized wood, dated to around 7,500 BCE. Suddenly, Dwarka was no longer only a legend. It was a question. Could an ancient settlement truly lie submerged offshore? Could the stories have preserved a memory of a real catastrophe? Skeptics were quick to respond. They argued that the formations might be natural rock outcroppings, that currents could have carried artifacts from elsewhere, that underwater archaeology is notoriously difficult to interpret. And they were not wrong. The sea distorts. The seabed shifts. Nature can imitate architecture in haunting ways. But still, natural rock does not easily form clean corners. It does not arrange itself into city-like grids spanning miles. And what is most striking is not just the possibility of ruins, but the familiarity of the story. Because Dwarka is not the only culture to speak of drowning. Flood myths exist everywhere, from Mesopotamia to China, from the Americas to the Pacific Islands. Different names, different gods, different landscapes, but always the same image: water rising, cities vanishing, survivors carrying fragments of knowledge into a changed world. For a long time, scholars treated these myths as symbolic, but geology tells us something undeniable. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically. Coastal plains disappeared. Human communities living near the water would have been displaced or erased. The ocean did not only reshape geography, it reshaped memory. Dwarka, if authentic, may be part of that submerged human story, a reminder that ancient coastlines were once thriving worlds, and that the greatest archaeological sites may not be buried in deserts, but drowned beneath waves. The city described in the epics was said to have golden gates and towering palaces. The underwater ruins are humbler: stone foundations, scattered remains. But myths rarely preserve details with precision. They preserve emotion, the feeling of loss, the sense of something precious slipping beneath the surface. Perhaps Dwarka was not exactly as the stories claimed. Perhaps it was not a divine kingdom. But perhaps it was real enough. A coastal settlement, a port, a place of trade, ritual, and life. And when the sea came, it became legend. The question lingers like salt air. How many other Dwarkas existed? How many cities were built on land that is now ocean? How many chapters of human history were written on shorelines that no longer exist? The sea does not only hide ruins, it hides beginnings and endings. From India's drowned city, we now climb high above the waves, to the thin air of the Andes, where stone was shaped with such precision it still feels unreal. High in the Bolivian Andes, 12,800 feet above sea level, lies a site that defies explanation: Pumapunku. To reach it, you drive across a wide plateau, windswept and vast. There is little vegetation. The sky feels closer here, the air thinner, the silence heavier. And then, scattered across the landscape, like forgotten machinery, you see the stones. Not natural boulders, not the weathered remains of a crumbling fortress, but engineered forms. Angular, deliberate, massive. Some weigh over 100 tons. Others are carved with interlocking joints, tight as puzzle pieces. Flat planes smoothed to tolerances of 0.02 inches. Modern machining standards. These aren't ruins in the traditional sense. They are components. Red sandstone and andesite blocks shaped with such accuracy that no mortar is needed. Holes drilled in perfect symmetry. Grooves cut with a uniformity that modern engineers struggle to replicate using Bronze Age tools. The nearest quarry for the hardest stones is over 50 miles away, across a lake. No roads, no wheels, No written language, no clear reason. The mainstream explanation is persistence, that ancient people, using soft tools and sand as an abrasive, labored for generations. Patient hands, endless time, extraordinary skill. But even then, questions remain. Why here? Why such precision? And why do the stones seem so broken? Because Pumapunku isn't whole. The blocks lie scattered across the plain as if tossed by a great force. Walls shattered, foundations uprooted. Some researchers suggest an earthquake, others a flood. Whatever it was, it ended suddenly, violently, and the builders never returned. The culture associated with the site, the Tiwanaku, flourished around 500 CE. They had impressive knowledge of agriculture and astronomy. They built great monuments nearby, but even they may not have been the original architects of Pumapunku. Some scholars believe they inherited the site, that it was already ancient when they arrived. They added to it, maintained it, but could not replicate it. The stonework is unlike anything else in the Andes. Even the Inca, who came centuries later, could not match its precision. Andesite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. Bronze tools are too soft to shape it cleanly, and yet these blocks are not only cut, they are cut with intent, interlocking design, and aesthetic grace. Some engineers, looking at the geometry, suggest techniques we have no record of. Vibration, heat, chemical softening, perhaps even tools now lost to history. But the theories remain speculative. What we are left with is the undeniable fact of the stones. Stones that shouldn't exist. Not at that altitude, not in that condition, not with that craftsmanship. Pumapunku is a wound in the archaeological narrative, a place where the story frays, a reminder that progress is not always linear, that knowledge can be lost, that a civilization may reach a peak and vanish, and that the only evidence of its passage might be a block of stone so perfect it whispers of a forgotten hand. What was Pumapunku? A temple? A port? A machine? We don't know, but we do know it was important, built to last, and then destroyed. Now, it sleeps in the high desert, its pieces like a shattered code we no longer understand. From this wind-blown riddle in the Andes, we move next to the Middle East, to the stones so large, even the Romans left them where they lay. The Romans were master builders. Aqueducts that carried water for miles, roads that stitched together an empire, amphitheaters that still echo with forgotten cheers. They knew stone, they knew scale, they knew pride. But in the Bekaa Valley of modern-day Lebanon, they encountered something that gave them pause. At a place we now call Baalbek. Here, in the ruins of the Temple of Jupiter, lie some of the largest building blocks ever used by human hands. Not just large, unthinkably massive. 3 limestone blocks, each weighing around 800 tons, form a platform known as the Trilithon, just below the Roman temple. And in the nearby quarry, more stones lie abandoned. One of them, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs over 1,000 tons. Another, found more recently, may weigh close to under 600. To move such stones today would require custom-built machinery. To lift them? That's another story. And yet, they were moved, positioned with a precision that boggles the mind, fitted so tightly that not even a knife blade can slip between them. How? When? And perhaps most haunting, why? The Roman temple above them is impressive but modest by comparison. Its stones are smaller, its methods known, its construction celebrated in text and art. But the foundation? Silence. There is no Roman record describing the movement or placement of the trilithon stones. No bragging rights, no victory inscriptions, nothing. It's as if they inherited the platform and simply built on top. Mainstream archaeology attributes the entire complex to Roman or Phoenician engineers, massive labor forces, wooden rollers, levers, patience. But the logistics strain belief. To move an 800-ton stone across uneven ground and then raise it 30 feet into the air would require tens of thousands of workers in perfect coordination, using tools and techniques that leave no trace. No tool marks, no staging areas, no evidence. And then there's the unsettling detail that other cultures, too, seem to build atop megalithic foundations they couldn't match. It's a recurring pattern. From Peru to Lebanon, from Mexico to Cambodia. Larger, older stones at the base. Smaller, newer ones above. As if the blueprint of civilization had been partially erased, then hastily redrawn by those who came later. Some researchers propose Baalbek's platform is a relic of a much older civilization, one capable of manipulating mass on a scale we've forgotten, one that vanished, leaving behind only stone. Others suggest it was a sacred site for so long that each new culture simply added their layer, respecting what they couldn't explain. A palimpsest of belief, an architectural echo. What we know is this: the stones are real. They were moved. They were placed with intention. And they still sit there, unmoved by time, immune to interpretation. A question carved in limestone. The modern mind resists mystery. We want timelines, explanations, certainty. But Baalbek stands against that desire. It is too heavy to ignore, too old to explain, too perfect to dismiss. From these immovable giants in Lebanon, we journey next across a vast ocean to a city built on water, a place where stone rises not from the land, but from the sea itself, a city that floats and remembers. There are no roads to Nan Madol, only water. To reach it, you drift in a canoe through mangrove-lined channels until suddenly basalt walls emerge from the lagoon like the remnants of a dream. Located off the coast of Pohnpei in Micronesia, Nan Madol is unlike any other ancient city. It was built on coral, a complex of nearly 100 artificial islets connected by narrow canals constructed from basalt columns, massive stone logs, some weighing up to 50 tons, stacked like wooden beams in a house. A city floating atop the sea. A city built from black stone. Estimates suggest over 750,000 metric tons of basalt were transported to construct it, but the nearest source is miles away, across difficult terrain. The site spans 170 acres, walls, platforms, tombs, and dwellings rising directly from the reef. There is no mortar. The stones are fitted by weight and precision alone. European explorers first documented Nan Madol in the 1820s, but systematic study didn't begin until the late 20th century. Mainstream archaeology dates major construction to around 1200 CE, attributing it to the Sodelur dynasty, a centralized power said to have ruled the island until civil war broke it apart. The Sodelurs left no written records, only stone and stories. According to Pohnpeian oral tradition, Nan Madol was built by twin sorcerers who flew the stones into place using magic. They are said to have harnessed spiritual power to construct a city above the waves. Folklore? Perhaps. But even modern engineers struggle to explain how a small island population could have transported and lifted such immense stones without cranes, wheels, or metal tools? Floating them on rafts? Possible. But some stones rise 25 feet above the waterline, stacked in walls 50 feet thick, with no signs of ramps or scaffolding. The logistics border on the unbelievable. And then there's the why. Why build a ceremonial and political capital on water? Why construct on a reef vulnerable to flooding, storms, and erosion? Unless perhaps the city was once dry land. Some researchers speculate that Nan Madol could be far older than accepted, that the current sea level hides its true age, that it may have been built when the reef was land, before rising oceans submerged the foundations. If true, it would push the timeline back thousands of years, back toward the end of the last ice age, back into the same deep past that haunts sites like Yonaguni, Dwarka, and Göbekli Tepe. Like them, Nan Madol would become part of a different story, a story of pre-flood civilizations, maritime cultures erased not by war or famine, but by the slow, implacable rising of the sea. Today, the site is partially reclaimed by jungle and tide. Moss softens the stones. Fish swim through what were once streets. The air is humid and quiet. And yet, it still stands. A city that should not exist. A city that answers no questions, only asks them. Who built this place? How did they move the stones? Why here? And what did it mean to create a city that floats, half in this world, half in another? From Micronesia's stone city adrift in the Pacific, we travel next to the Caribbean, to a line of stones beneath crystal waters, a road, perhaps, or a memory. It began with a shadow beneath the sea. In 1968, pilot and zoologist J. Manson Valentine was flying low over the turquoise waters of the Bahamas near Bimini when he saw it, a perfectly straight line of large rectangular stones stretching across the ocean floor, 18 feet below the surface. It looked like a road, a submerged causeway, a path leading nowhere. When divers descended, they found massive limestone blocks, some over 12 feet long, aligned with eerie precision. The formation stretched more than 2,000 feet, curving gently like the remnants of an ancient harbor wall or ceremonial walkway. It became known as the Bimini Road, and the timing was uncanny. 3 decades earlier, the famed psychic Edgar Cayce had predicted that evidence of Atlantis would be discovered near Bimini in 1968 or 1969. The coincidence was irresistible. Speculation erupted. Was this the edge of Plato's lost continent? Was it a fragment of a sunken world? Or was it simply geology playing tricks? For decades, researchers, divers, geologists, and dreamers have debated the Bimini Formation. Some point to features they believe are unmistakably artificial. T-shaped blocks, right angles, evenly spaced prop stones beneath larger slabs, suggesting deliberate leveling. Others note the challenges of dating limestone in underwater conditions. Samples yield inconsistent results. Carbon dating struggles to lock down a definitive age. Geologists offer a different view. They argue that the Bimini Road is beach rock, a natural formation created when sand and shell fragments cement together in intertidal zones. As sea levels rose, these slabs fractured and submerged. Nature, they say, mimicking design. But beach rock doesn't usually form in perfectly aligned rectangular blocks. It doesn't lay itself in long curves stretching half a mile, and it doesn't place smaller stones beneath larger ones to keep them level. And then there's the context. During the last ice age, sea levels were 300 feet lower. The Bahamas were vast and exposed, a wide plateau of coastal plains. Any culture living there, any roads, ports, or structures, would now lie drowned beneath the Atlantic. The Bimini Road may be a fragment of that hidden shoreline, a hint, a beginning. If it is artificial, it would date back at least 10,000 years, older than the pyramids, older than agriculture. A maritime people navigating shallow waters, building with stone, then watching their world sink beneath the waves. And if it's not, even then, the formation captures our attention for a reason, because it touches something primal, the sense that we've forgotten something important, that the ocean hides more than fish and coral. It hides memory, possibility, legacy. Bimini Road may never yield certainty. There is no inscription, no artifact, only stone and silence, and the lingering shape of a road that seems to lead not forward, but back, to a time before time, to a world that vanished beneath rising seas. What else lies beneath the silt and sand? How many roads have we forgotten? How many cities drowned before they could be remembered? From the Caribbean's submerged stones, we journey next to the deep forests of the Caucasus Mountains, where ancient chambers, silent and sealed, still watch the world from beneath the trees. In the shadowed valleys of the Caucasus Mountains, nestled between the Black Sea and the Caspian, thousands of ancient stone structures lie hidden among the trees. They are called dolmens, not the European kind. Those are smaller, simpler. These are different, massive slabs of stone, each weighing up to 30 tons, arranged into box-like chambers with flat ceilings and a single round entrance, perfectly circular, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Over 3,000 of them have been discovered, scattered across 7,500 square miles in southern Russia and Abkhazia. They are strange, silent, and completely out of place. No one knows who built them. No one knows exactly when. Some archaeologists place their construction around 4,000 years ago, citing radiocarbon dating from organic material found inside. Others argue they could be much older, far older, possibly built between 10,000 and 25,000 years ago, before the accepted dawn of civilization. And then there's the mystery of the construction. Each dolmen is made from 4 to 6 massive slabs, cut, moved, and assembled without mortar. The seams are tight, the geometry deliberate. But it's the entrance that haunts, always round, always smooth, always the same size, as if made by a template, as if shaped by a tool we no longer possess. Some dolmens are built into hillsides with only their facades visible. Others stand alone in clearings, aligned to unknown purposes. Still others are grouped in clusters, suggesting a larger cultural network. Acoustic studies in recent years revealed something even stranger. The chambers resonate, like tuning forks. Each dolmen has a unique frequency. Some researchers believe they were designed as sound chambers, for ritual, for meditation, for communication. If true, it means the builders understood resonance, vibration, the physics of space and tone. And yet, there are no inscriptions, no carvings, no artifacts linking them to any known culture. The indigenous groups who live nearby, the Circassians and Abkhaz, claim no knowledge of their origins. The dolmens have always been there, older than memory. Mainstream archaeology suggests they were burial sites built by Bronze Age pastoralists, but the evidence doesn't fully support this. Not all dolmens contain human remains, and burial chambers rarely require acoustic precision, nor do they typically feature such consistent architectural design over vast distances. So who built them? And why? Were they tombs, temples, something else entirely? Some scholars suggest a forgotten megalithic culture once spanned this region, a network of stone builders who understood sound, geometry, and astronomy, but whose civilization vanished before it could be named. Others say the dolmens may mark energy points or celestial alignments, part of an ancient system we've lost the language to interpret. And always, the question returns, if they were built before the last great flood, before the Younger Dryas event that reshaped the Earth, what knowledge did those builders possess? What memory were they trying to preserve? Why carve a perfect circle into stone? Why build thousands of these chambers in the silence of the forest? The trees offer no answers, only shadows, only moss-covered stone and a round hole that stares back like an eye. From the forgotten chambers of the Caucasus, we turn now to the oldest stone circle on Earth. Not in Europe, not in the Middle East, but in southern Africa, a ring of stones so old it may predate everything we thought we knew about ourselves. You're standing in a ring of stones. The land around you is dry, high in the mountains of Mpumalanga province, South Africa. There's no sign, no plaque, no visitor center. Just scattered dolerite rocks, weathered and dark, arranged in a rough circle. At first glance, it could be mistaken for a livestock pen or a crumbled ruin. But then, the alignments emerge. One stone marks due north, another due east. Others line up with the solstices, the equinoxes, and, most astonishing of all, the rise of Orion's belt. Not as it appears today, but as it would have risen 75,000 years ago. This is Adam's calendar. Discovered in 2003 by a South African pilot, the site gained attention when researcher Michael Tellinger and geologist Johann Heine began investigating its layout. They found astronomical markers. They found erosion patterns suggesting extreme age. They found that this unassuming circle might be the oldest human-made structure on Earth, 75,000 years, 50,000 years before Göbekli Tepe, before Sumer, before Egypt, before agriculture, before everything. Mainstream scholars argue the site is natural, or at most, a recent construction, perhaps a few hundred years old, made by cattle herders. They say the alignments are coincidental, that erosion is not a reliable indicator of age, that it's just a hilltop with stones. But the arguments don't erase the questions, because this circle is not alone. Surrounding Adam's calendar, visible in aerial and satellite imagery, are over 10 million stone structures scattered across southern Africa. Circular enclosures, stone paths, long channels etched into the earth like veins. Too many to be kraals, too intentional to be random. No written history mentions them. No oral tradition claims them. They simply exist, older than memory. Some of the channels appear to be for water management, possibly irrigation. Others suggest a system of connectivity, as if mapping energy or territory on a vast, forgotten scale. And still, the calendar circle stands, at the center, at the beginning. If the alignments are real, if they track celestial events as they occurred tens of thousands of years ago, it implies symbolic thinking, astronomical observation, planning, all at a time when humans, according to the textbooks, were hunter-gatherers, with no architecture, no mathematics, no structured belief. And yet someone shaped the stones, someone watched the stars, someone marked time with megaliths. It challenges everything. Because if modern humans, our species, had this capacity so long ago, it means the seeds of civilization were planted far earlier than we believed. It means knowledge may have existed in waves, rising, falling, forgotten, remembered. Adam's calendar is not grand. It's not made of polished marble or towering obelisks. It's humble, rough, worn by wind. But perhaps that is why it survived. Because it was never meant to dominate, it was meant to align, to remind, to witness. The stars it once marked still shine. The earth still turns beneath them. But the builders are gone. And we, their distant descendants, stand in the circle, uncertain of what we've found. From the southern tip of Africa to the mountains of Turkey, from undersea roads to floating cities, the pieces begin to form a mosaic, not of one lost civilization, but of many, a pattern of knowledge rising and falling like the tides. And now, as we step back and look at the whole, the deeper mystery begins to take shape, not just what was built, but what was forgotten, and why. All across the world, the same silence echoes, a silence not of absence, but of memory buried too deep. From Göbekli Tepe to Adam's calendar, from drowned cities to megalithic chambers, a strange and quiet story begins to emerge. It is not told in words or scrolls. It is told in stone, in alignments, in questions. The pattern repeats. Structures too old, too precise, too advanced for the civilizations we credit with building them. A road under the sea, a city floating on coral, a mountain that's not a mountain at all. Each site alone is an anomaly. Together they form a whisper. What if civilization did not begin once, but many times? What if our history is not a line, but a circle? Mainstream archaeology paints a steady climb. We were nomads, then we farmed, then we built, then we wrote. But the evidence doesn't always fit that story. Göbekli Tepe was ceremonial before agriculture. Gunung Padang may have been a pyramid, while the rest of the world still lived in caves. The structures under the sea would have had to exist before sea levels rose, before 10,000 BCE. And the tools, the techniques? Nowhere in the archaeological record is there a clear evolution from rough stone to the perfect symmetry seen at places like Pumapunku. It's as if the knowledge appeared fully formed, and then disappeared, vanished, leaving behind only what was carved in stone. And even those carvings, many were buried, as if to protect them, or to hide them. This raises a possibility that many are reluctant to explore, that history, as we know it, is only a fragment, that what we call prehistory may not be pre-anything at all, but rather the ruins of a forgotten chapter. Not Atlantis, not fantasy, just memory misfiled. We've seen this before. The city of Troy was once considered myth, until it was unearthed. The stories of Ur and Babylon were once dismissed, until their walls were found beneath the sands. History has a way of catching up with myth. So why not here? Why not with these stones? The flood myths, too, are dismissed as legend, but they come from every continent. Cultures with no contact, no common language, telling the same story. Water came. The world changed. We lost something. It is too consistent to ignore. What if the myths are not fiction? What if they are memory, encoded in metaphor, passed through generations, surviving not in exact details, but in meaning? A warning, a lament, a promise. Civilization, it seems, may be more fragile than we think. And knowledge, once lost, is hard to regain. Our ancestors may not have built skyscrapers or satellites, but they may have understood stone. They may have understood the stars. They may have known how to build with purpose, aligned to the sky, anchored in the earth. They may have carried wisdom we've only just begun to rediscover. And if they did, then what does that say about us? About where we're going? About what we might forget next? The story is not finished. There are still chambers unexcavated, still walls beneath the waves, still questions waiting in silence. But as we listen closer, we begin to hear something else. Not a conspiracy, not a fantasy, but a faint echo of ourselves. From long ago, before the flood, before the forgetting, from the builders who came before, and the message they left, carved in stone. We were here, we remembered. Will you? It begins to feel less like coincidence, and more like a conversation across time. Each site speaks a different dialect, temples, roads, chambers, alignments, but they all seem to be saying the same thing. There was something here before. Not just one place, not one forgotten kingdom swallowed by the sea, but a pattern, global, persistent, and strangely familiar. We've seen it now on 5 continents. Buried temples in Turkey, submerged monuments in Japan and India, hidden pyramids in Indonesia, geometric paths under Caribbean water, perfectly cut stones in the Andes, gigantic foundation blocks in Lebanon, a floating city on coral reefs, stone chambers in the forests of Russia, and a calendar in South Africa older than the concept of time itself. The implication is both simple and staggering. That civilization may be older than we thought. That knowledge may rise and fall, like the tide, not in a straight line, but in waves, and that with each fall, we forget a little more. Each time, the survivors rebuild, but the blueprints are fainter, the myths more symbolic, the tools more primitive, until one day the ruins are unrecognizable, the stories are dismissed, and the cycle begins again. This isn't about rejecting science or rewriting history with fantasy. It's about allowing room in the narrative for humility, because the deeper we dig, the more we find that doesn't quite fit, that doesn't explain itself, that doesn't go away when we stop looking. We are not the first to wonder at the stars. We are not the first to build in stone. We are not the first to ask how long we've been here, or how many times we've had to begin again. And perhaps we are not the first to forget. The hardest part of this story is not the mystery. It's the loss, the knowledge we no longer have, the hands that shaped monoliths we cannot replicate, the voices that once echoed through chambers tuned to frequencies we no longer hear. We try to explain it all away. Coincidence, overestimated dates, natural formations, misinterpretation. And sometimes those explanations are right. Not every stone is sacred. Not every ruin is ancient. But even the best theories fall silent in front of certain facts. Stones weighing hundreds of tons moved across mountains, underwater structures older than recorded civilization, alignments with stars as they appeared 12,000 years ago, construction techniques more precise than the tools we claim they had. The evidence is not shouting, it is whispering. And like any whisper, it's easy to miss if you're not listening. But if you lean in, if you stop and listen, something begins to take shape. Not a map, not a timeline, but a feeling. A sense that we are walking on the surface of something deeper, that beneath the asphalt and concrete of our modern world lies an older foundation, one built in stone and silence and starlight. It calls to us not with answers, but with questions. And perhaps that is the most human thing of all, to wonder, to search, to remember that for every known chapter of our story, there may be others still waiting to be read. Next, we gather the threads, because what began as scattered anomalies is now something else entirely. A pattern, a possibility, and a question we can no longer ignore. Are we the first? Or just the latest? And if we are not the first, what exactly did we forget? The story is bigger than a site, bigger than a stone or a date or a forgotten city. By now, the shape of it has emerged, not as a theory, but as a rhythm of rise and fall, of memory and forgetting, of builders and survivors. And in that rhythm, something deeply human is revealed. Not certainty, but continuity. The ancient world was not silent. It spoke in geometry, in star maps, in the heavy stillness of monoliths placed just so. It preserved knowledge not in books, but in alignments, in echoes, in ruins that would outlast language. We are only just learning how to listen. For centuries, we imagined that civilization was a ladder, each generation climbing a little higher than the last. But what if it's a spiral? What if knowledge circles back on itself? What if we've reached this place before? And what if the ruins we now uncover are not anomalies, but mile markers, evidence that we've been here, not exactly, not identically, but here, at the edge of forgetting and at the threshold of rediscovery? Because the pattern is not just archaeological, it is psychological. When we believe we are the pinnacle, we stop looking back. We stop asking who came before. We pave over the foundations and build new towers without ever asking who first cleared the ground. But beneath every foundation is another, and under that, another still. That is what the stones tell us. They are patient. They are not in a hurry to be understood. And they do not lie. They simply remain. Long after myth has faded, long after names have changed, they point north. They mark the solstice. They remember what we forgot. There is a humility in that, because while technology changes and tools evolve, the questions stay the same. Who are we? Where did we come from? And what does it mean to leave something behind that will outlive us? In every ruin is the imprint of a hand, a mind, a vision. And whether that builder lived 5,000 years ago or 50,000, they stood beneath the same stars. They felt the same pull toward meaning, toward permanence in a fleeting world. We may never know their names. We may never know exactly what they believed or how they lived. But we know this. They built. They watched the sky. They placed stones with purpose. And some of them knew the flood was coming. From Turkey to Micronesia, from Bolivia to South Africa, the evidence suggests a global awareness of time, of movement, of catastrophe. It suggests memory. And it suggests that perhaps the most important knowledge is not what we invent, but what we remember, what we preserve, what we carry forward through the dark. Because someday the flood comes again, not always as water, sometimes as fire, sometimes as silence, sometimes as indifference. But it comes. And when it does, what will remain? What will we have carved that still speaks? What will we have aligned that still points? And will someone else, far in the future, stand where we stand now? Looking back and wondering, who were they? And how did they forget so much? This is where the story ends and begins again. We have walked among ancient stones, stared into chambers sealed for millennia, dove beneath waves to glimpse cities lost. And at every step, we have been met not with answers, but with invitations to wonder, to question, to remember. The official narrative is still what most accept. Civilization began around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. Farming sparked cities. Cities sparked writing. Writing sparked history. Before that, there were only scattered bands of foragers. No temples, no calendars, no monuments. But the stones disagree. They whisper of earlier chapters, of builders who tracked the stars when we were supposed to still be hunting, of architects who moved monoliths without machines, of cultures who marked time with stone long before the first cities rose. If even one of the sites we visited is as old as the evidence suggests, just one, then the timeline shifts, the narrative bends, the roots of civilization deepen, and with that realization comes something unexpected. Not fear, not fantasy, but humility, a recognition that human beings have always reached upward, toward meaning, toward memory, toward the stars, and that we are not, perhaps, the first to do so. We are part of a cycle, a pattern, a rhythm older than writing, older than names. We inherit not only the earth, but the forgetting. And now, in our time, so modern, so digital, so fast, we have a choice. To build with arrogance or with awareness, to believe we are the pinnacle, or to recognize we may be a bridge. Because if we are not the first, we will not be the last, and the flood, whatever shape it takes, will come again. When it does, what will remain? A plastic world, a vanishing archive of code and cloud, or something slower, simpler, aligned to sun and stone, built not just to last, but to be understood. We began this journey with a question: what if history is incomplete? Now we end it with another. What will the next civilization find when they uncover us? Will they find ruins or reminders? Will they wonder why we stopped looking, or be grateful that we began? The story of humanity is not written only in books. It is written in what we choose to preserve and in what we choose to see. So the next time you pass a crumbling wall, a lonely circle of stones, or a tale dismissed as myth, pause, look closer, listen, because sometimes the past is not behind us, it's beneath us, waiting, and if we listen carefully, we might just hear the voice of the world before the flood, reminding us not who we were, but who we still might become.